You want to be that which leads others out of that. And now, more than ever, is the time to show these great qualities, to extol these great qualities, and to embody these great qualities, which you have. Now it's time to magnify them, personify them, and inspire others with them. And there's never been a time where they're needed more than right now.
So, what he's talking about, first of all, does anybody have any thoughts on that? You want to add? Anybody? Okay. Well, that's okay. What he's trying to say is that society is going to take a picture.
Biggest cause of death in this country, besides mortgages, student debt. Because there's no jobs out there for these people who trusted their country to be there for them. They basically did that exercise where you fall backwards and you're...
Alright. So, basically what he's trying to say is society's going to take a picture of you and try to define who you are. Right? Don't let them do that. A good example of that is that 80% of high school students that drop out end up serving a 2-year jail term or longer within 5 years of dropping out of high school. Right? So basically, what that is there's a corrections officer standing outside of high school with shackles and a jumpsuit waiting for these kids to walk out of this school. Because as soon as they drop out, bam, they're a high school dropout. And you're a picture of what a high school dropout is. Right? And high school dropouts end up in jail because that's what society says high school dropouts do. Right? So what he's saying is that you want to be the kind of person that doesn't let society put you into a category. Do things that are unexpected of you. Do things that aren't asked of you, but you do because it makes you feel like a good person. I don't know if any of you have ever volunteered before. When I was your age, I would be like, volunteer working for free? I don't do that, right? That's okay. It took me a long time to come around and volunteer. But when I did, it made me feel awesome. And I do it all the time now. Because it makes me feel good. It takes me out of the picture of what the normal self-absorbed American is. That's only, the classic American that's only concerned about his big house and his big car and his money and his bank account and his degrees. And I think if you could do something to break yourself out of that framework, whatever it is, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even have to be volunteer work. Do it. Because it's going to give you a different perspective, and it's going to take you out of what society's picture of you is. So, this Steve Jobs thing that I was telling you about, we're going to watch this. This commencement speech. Now, this took place, he delivered this speech a few weeks or a few months after he found out he had terminal cancer. So, he's giving this speech to the students as somebody who's been given a death sentence. And I think that's really inspiring because death is the ultimate motivator.
This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
It now gives me great pleasure to introduce this year's commencement speaker, Steve Jobs. The Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Apple and Pixar Animation Studios. Stanford University has been characterized since its founding by a willingness to be bold and to strike out in new directions. And this is a characteristic very much shared by today's speaker. A pioneer and visionary, for almost 3 decades, his name and the companies he has founded have been synonymous with innovation and creativity. As a young boy growing up in Los Altos, Steve Jobs came of age at the same time as Silicon Valley. While still in school, he attended lectures informally at Stanford, as well as at Hewlett-Packard, where he spent a summer working. After graduating from high school, he left California to attend Reed College. A trek through India, and a short stint as a video game designer for Atari followed. Soon after his return to the Valley in 1974, he became a regular, along with Steve Wozniak, at meetings of the Homebrew Computer Club, held at the Stanford 1980s.
No,
And
we
the
don't care
mass
about this
often
guy, right? We don't even know who he is, so stop talking. Seriously, like, everybody in the, like, this is what I'm talking about the classic format of education failing. We all know that we're waiting to hear from this guy, right? Sitting down. Yet this guy goes on for about 10 minutes, telling us everything that Steve Jobs then tells us about his own life. I don't want to hear it from you, I want to hear it from him. And yet, this guy, who's probably like the president of Stanford University, which is one of the most prestigious universities in the world, gets so trumped up on his own self-importance that he goes on for 10 minutes about Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs is sitting right behind him about to talk about Steve Jobs. So that I just wanted to pause that and point that out. So any of you who are interested in technology fields at all, this is really important. Now, we'll talk about it more later, we'll just watch, but it's really important.
Computer that was completely different from the personal computers of that day. Steve also co-founded Pixar award-winning films, Toy Story. Since his return to app
Still
media,
talking.
store and purchase are legal click away at user.
Alright, dude.
Steve is also widely recognized sitting under a tree.
Oh my God.
Tosh was on the start. Supports to schools and powerful tool. His answer was deceptively simple.
See, and there you go. This is why this happens. John Hennessy, president of Stanford University. He's the president of Stanford University, which means that automatically everything that he has to say is super important and super poignant and everybody can't wait to hear it. Well, that's a load of garbage, because I don't want to hear from him. I don't care about what he has to say. I want to hear about Steve Jobs, because nobody knows who John Hennessy is. Everybody knows who Steve Jobs is, whether you care about what he did or not. You still have heard of him before. So I think when we talk about your learning process, you're going to come across teachers like this who are really, really schooled in their field, and they think that everything they say is super important. And some of it might be super important, but it's not all super important. And sometimes you have to look beyond the person talking and just kind of pick out little things about what they're saying. Because a lot of this is people that do things for their own ego, and this is a big part of that.
We hire Jobs.
Thank you. That is 7 minutes and 30 seconds into this video. He finally here.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them.
So now that reinforces what I was telling you about college. Now this guy developed arguably one of the greatest technological innovations, right? Well, yeah, the most important technological innovation in creating Apple computers, which created the iPhone, iPod, Pixar, all of that. The most important class in creating a whole generation of technological devices was a calligraphy class, which is not required in any computer science major anywhere in this country. So it's a little something to think about how different experiences can affect you in different ways.
If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I'd let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking, don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything. You thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now.
Keep in mind, this was 2005, so he lived another 7 years after the doctors told him he had 3 months to live. So, I mean, did he go on forever? No, but nobody does.
When was that? 2005.
Yeah, 2005. So, I believe he died in 2012. So that's like another 7 years.
Okay, I said I believe you.
This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I've always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
So, lesson, failure is a crucial part of success. Now, do I think Steve Jobs' point in that speech was to drop out of college? No. But his point is that sometimes, say you're an engineering major, right? Sometimes the most useful thing you'll learn won't be in an engineering class. Say you want to be a writer, a journalist. Sometimes the most useful thing that you're going to learn about journalism is not going to be it might be not in any class at all. In his parting message, stay hungry, stay foolish. Stay hungry is, Steve Jobs always knew that he was going to do something that he wanted to do with technology. He worked on it from very, very young, and even though he dropped out of college, he still went after that goal with an obsession. So the important point of that is that whatever you like to do, even if something happens, like for example, good example, my freshman year of high school, my freshman year of college, after I finished my freshman year, my dad lost his job, right? And I had to go back home, help out with the family. help hold things down. I thought that was it for me, you know, I'm bad break, happens all the time. But I stayed hungry, I stayed really wanting knowledge, and wanting to find out things, and to learn about learning and how learning takes place. And I never gave that up. And 5 years later, I ended up going back and finishing my bachelor's degree and eventually to graduate school. And so when he says stay hungry, never lose that focus. There's going to be things in life that happen to you. The road isn't always going to be straight. But you have to stay hungry for what you want. Don't ever let anything or anybody that happens to you say anything to keep you away from your goal. And stay foolish is do things that aren't defined as quote-unquote successful by the people in your field, especially. People in the computer engineering field would have thought that he was a complete and total lunatic. Yet he's the most influential person in computer engineering ever. And probably for the next 100 years and for the last 100 years. So when he says stay foolish, stay hungry, he wants you to know that the road of life isn't going to be straight. And you may have to stop for a little while chasing that goal. You may have to take a little leeway off somewhere, help somebody out that helped you out, or focus on something else. I mean, I was living in Brooklyn in 9/11. I was standing on the roof of my apartment building and I watched Twin Towers fall. A lot of people I know that went through that, never again, they moved out of the city, would never go back, just completely stopped what they were doing. But it's a learning experience. I happened to be living with somebody at the time. I had 3 roommates, one of them was Muslim. So we had a long talk that night about extremism and about how the media focuses on the loudest portion of a group that's not necessarily the majority. So I learned a lot on that night, and I learned a lot going forward about keeping your focus. Whatever you guys want to do, even if you don't know what you want to do right now, go to college. Because when you go to college, there's all these new ideas and all these new people, and you may sit in on a class that was, a required elective and get really into it. And who knows what it is? It could be anything. But the important part is, go to college. Go live that life. Expose yourself to other people, to other knowledge, to other, one of the best parts about college is that you come across genius in so many different ways, and very few of them have a PhD after their name. A lot of them is going to be the person you live with. Or if you don't live at college and you commute like I did, after 3 or 4 years, I, didn't live on campus. There was no need for me to as I was older. Sometimes you just meet people you got to do projects with. One of my classmates is a man named Clint Smith, who's now like a nationally recognized poet. And I went to school with him, we graduated, I didn't see him for like 5 years. One day, on one of these YouTube videos, he was on it. And the YouTube video had like 5 million hits, and he was huge, and he tours the whole country, he does poetry, he's spoken word now. So I dropped him an email, and he answered me back, and we're like, oh man, yeah, I remember you from this class, and at the time I had no idea, this guy won a Newbery Award. This is an award-winning poet, nationally recognized. And at the time, me and him were just goofing around. You know what I'm saying? In college, I had no idea that in the future he would go on to be this, or I would go on to be what I am. So, I think the important part of college, and the whole point of this presentation, is just to expose yourself to perspectives, to new knowledge, to other people. And that really, by learning about other people, you learn about yourself. Just like Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about, we went to the moon to discover Earth. Well, you go to college to discover yourself. Thank you very much. And always ask questions. Always. It's okay. I know it's a Saturday morning. You guys can chill, but whenever you're in this situation, ask questions. Get as much information as you can.
Yeah, it's like little things. I know it's
You're way off.
I wrote them. What was the color?
How did you break?
I break it. I put it in my bag. We have a lot of tables in biology. Someone knocked my bag off from last week.
I got one more chance.
Oh, you gotta take